Okay, so the last concept that I saw that you guys struggled with is finding the equation for a circle when it's not in radius and center form. So generally, if it was in radius and center form, it was pretty straightforward. But when it's not, we have to force it. So remember the standard form for a circle is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, where h and k is your center and r is your radius. And if you look, this equation, I don't know why my computer's being so silly. This equation over here does not look like this equation, right? So what we're going to have to do, like we talked about in one of our discussions, was that we're going to have to complete the square. So to do this, I'm going to separate my x stuff and my y stuff. So I'm going to put x squared plus 2x, and I'm going to leave a space, plus y squared. There's no other y term. And then I'm going to move the 8 to the other side because I don't really need the 8 in my life right now. Now, to complete the square, you take the number, well, you make sure that your x squared or your y squared has a coefficient of 1, which it should at this level. And then we're going to take the number with x, which in our case is 2. All right, so 2, and we're going to times it by a half. So 1/2. And then I actually I like to put the plus there. So plus 2 times 1/2 is positive 1. And then I'm going to square that number. So positive 1 squared makes positive 1. So what number do I need to add to make a perfect square? I need to add 1. So now this piece in blue factors. It factors into x plus 1 squared. Now let's look at the y part. So in my y part, I just have a y squared. And remember, completing the square requires you to have the single. So a single y, not a y squared. So here, y squared is a perfect square. It's y minus 0 squared. So now we have to deal with the 8 on the other side. So in blue, I needed to add 1 to make a perfect square. So I need to also add 1 to the 8. For orange, I didn't need to do anything. So the orange, the y part, doesn't change the other side. So I get 8 plus 1 over here is 9. Now, plenty of people can now write your center and radius and draw the graph, but just to make sure, I'm going to show you, if you're not quite sure, how to line this up and figure out your h and your k. So I have the standard form written right underneath. I know that this thing plus 1 has to be minus h. So plus 1 has to be the same as minus h. So to get h alone, I'll divide by -1, and I get h is -1. For the y part, I have -0 equals -k. So -0 equals -k. So if I divide by -1, I get k equals 0. And then lastly, r squared has to equal 9. So 9 equals r squared. So if I take the square root on both sides, r is equal to the square root of 9. But the square root of 9 is 3. So r is 3. So now knowing all of those things, we're going to use the circle function. I would start with the pencil and plot the center, which is -1, 0. And I would count out the radius, north, south, east, and west. So north 3, west 3, 1, 2, 3, south 1, 2, 3, east 1, 2, 3. And then I would use the circle button. So in the circle button, the first thing you do is you click the center, and then you move the circle button outward to one of your radius counts, and you plot there, and it will draw a nice, beautiful circle, which I am incapable of doing. Okay, let's try it again. This one has got a little bit more complicated. Same idea, but we're going to complete the square twice. So first, let's get x stuff together. So I've got x squared plus 4x. I'm going to leave a little bit of space. Y squared plus 6y equals 3. Now that 3 was on the right-hand side, so I didn't have to move it, so it just stays. Okay, so now we're going to make sure that the x squared has a coefficient of 1, which it does, and it should. So I'm going to take the number with x, +4, and I'm going to times it by 1/2, which makes +2. And then I'm going to square +2, which makes 4. So what do I need to add to complete the square? I need to add 4. Let's do it to both sides. And now what perfect square does this become? It becomes x plus 2 squared. And if you're wondering, it's not a coincidence that this value that you got when you times by 1/2 or divided by 2, however you want to think of it, is the value in the parentheses. That's by design. Okay, let's do the y's. So my y squared has a 1, so I'm taking +6, and I'm timesing it by 1/2, or dividing it by 2. That gives me +3. And then I need to square +3, which makes +9. So what do I need to add? I need to add 9, and I'm going to do it to both sides. And then this comes down, and I've got y plus 3 squared. And then we'll just calculate 3 plus 4 plus 9 is 16. So now either you can look at that and decide your h and k and your r, or you have to think about it. And it's either way is fine. So if I line up x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, I know that minus h has to be +2, so h has to be -2. And negative k has to be +3, so positive k has to be -3. And then r squared is 16, so r is the square root of 16, which is 4. So my center is -2, -3. So I'm going to plot that with the pencil. And then I'm going to count out my radius of 4 in at least one direction in Aleks. So like 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we'll use our circle button and we'll plot the center and we'll stretch the circle out and it will draw a perfect one. But I am not really good at drawing it freehand, so I have to put in the north, south, east, and west, and it still comes out terrible. All right, let's try another one. So again, I encourage you to try this one by yourself, pause the video, come back and see if you get the same thing as me. So I'm going to separate my x squared, my y squared, and I'm going to move the 16 over because I don't really care about it right now. Then for the x's, I'm going to take the number with x and I'm going to divide it by 2 or times it by 1/2. That gives me +4. And when I square that, I get 16. So I'm going to plus 16 on both sides. Now that makes this guy become x plus 4 whole thing squared. So sometimes I ask you to write the equation as well. Okay, let's do the y's. So I'm going to take the number with y, +4, and I'm going to times it by 1/2 or divide it by 2. That gives me +2. I'm going to square that and I get +4. So what do I need to add? I need to add 4. And this guy becomes y plus 2 whole thing squared. And then on the other side of the equals, -16 plus 16 is 4. So my h is going to be -4. My k is going to be -2. And my r squared is going to be 4. And I know just out of years of teaching that students get squares and square roots confused. So I would recommend always writing this step out and then solving it, because some students will write like r equals the square root of 2. And I'm like, well, you already took the square root. So you're square rooting r squared square root equals square root of 4. And since we can do the square root of 4, we do, and we call it 2. So I'm going to plot my center, -4, -2. I'm going to count out my radius in at least one direction. And then I'm going to use the circle button to make a circle. Okay, let's try one more. So I've got an equation for a circle. I know it's a circle because there's an x squared and a y squared. And it's not in the right format, so I need the center and the radius to be able to draw it. So first I'll look at the x terms. I've got x squared minus 8x. And I got y squared plus 2y. And then I'm going to move that guy over, so equals -8. What number do I have to add to the x's to complete the square? So I'm going to take half of -8, which makes -4, and then I'm going to square that to make +16. So I need to plus 16 on both sides. Now this guy will factor into x minus 4 whole thing squared. Not a coincidence that that piece matches exactly what is in the parentheses. Now let's do the y's. I'm going to take +2 divided in 2. That makes +1. And then I'm going to square that, which is also +1. So I'm going to plus 1 on both sides. And this y part becomes y plus 1 squared. Now on the outside, on the equals, negative 8 plus 16 plus 1 makes 9. So now h is 4, y is negative 1. Sorry, not y, k. And then r squared is 9. So r is the square root of 9, which is 3. So I'm going to plot 4, negative 1. That's here. I'm going to count north, south, east, and west. And I'm going to draw my circle. In Aleks, you'll plot the center with one of these plotting tools, and then use the circle tool, put the hand over the center and solidify it, and that will fix your circle centered there. And then you'll move your hand over to one of the radiuses and click, and it will make a beautiful circle.